Hola a todos, bienvenidos una vez más al Meduso apesta en la guitarra. Ha pasado un rato desde mi último video, y no es porque estuviera muerto o de parranda. Simplemente decidí que sería más sencillo juntar las prácticas de las semanas 6 y 7 en un solo video, ya que estas dos semanas abarcan la misma lección. También para hacer el video más corto y entretenido decidí incluir solamente los días donde hubo algún progreso relevante en mi aprendizaje de la lección, en lugar de hacer un resumen del día a día como en videos anteriores. Espero encuentren este cambio aceptable. Sin más por el momento, espero disfruten del video.
You kind of feel it stretch a bit. You should feel this exercise not hurt, but you should feel it's stretching. Okay, if it's not stretching, you're not doing it hard enough, like you haven't got enough stretch, not pressing harder, obviously, just you need to make it a bit more stretchy if you find it too easy. So I found when I was doing this left-handed that even this basic one at the 5th fret, I could kind of get my fingers in the right spot, but it mostly hurt in here. Teach you to play it. It's using your little finger on the 3rd fret of the 2nd string. Now, the traditional fingering is using 1, 2 and 3. Most people will find getting the 3rd finger up near the fret very difficult, so they end up playing it back like that, and then you get off and get this dead pattern's going to be 1, 2 and 3 and 4. 1, 2 and 3 and 4. Down, down, up, miss, up, down. Okay, now we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this. We're going to spend a bit of time actually doing it together. This is the most common rhythm pattern used in music. Okay, if you play guitar, you've heard music. Then back. Now I do notice sometimes when I'm demonstrating these things I'm putting
2 y 3 y 4. 1, 2 y 3 y 4. Dieciocho, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34. Dieciocho, 19,